That smile. It is the most recognizable curve in cinematic history, a $1 million arc of teeth and warmth that earned her the title of America's sweetheart and turned her into the first female star to command a $20 million paycheck. For decades, Julia Roberts has been the face of the Hollywood dream, the girl next door, who found her way onto the throne of the A-list. But behind that radiant, polished veneer lies a history so fraught with tension, jealousy, and visceral hatred that it threatens to shatter the very image she spent 30 years building. In the gilded corridors of Tinseltown, the whispers have never stopped. They tell stories of Tinkerhell, of siblings who didn't speak for a decade, and of legendary directors who would rather retire than work with her again. Today, we are stripping away the pretty woman fantasy to reveal the stars who vehemently hate Julia Roberts, the industry giants who refuse to buy the act, and the shocking reasons why the most beloved woman in movies might actually be the most feared woman in the business. Get ready, because once you look past the laugh and the legacy, you'll find a trail of wreckage that Hollywood tried its best to hide. The most cutting betrayal in Julia's life didn't come from a rival actress or a jilted lover. It came from her own blood. The long-standing icy estrangement between Julia and her older brother Eric Roberts remains one of the most publicized family wars in the history of the industry. To understand the root of this bitterness, we have to go back to 1993, a year when Eric's life was spiraling out of control due to well-documented struggles with substance abuse. He was embroiled in a brutal, scorched-earth custody battle over his daughter, the future actress Emma Roberts, with his ex-girlfriend Kelly Cunningham. In a move that Eric reportedly interpreted as a dagger to the heart, Julia didn't just stay neutral. She took a decisive public stand against her own brother. She funded Cunningham's legal team and testified that Eric was unfit to be a parent. For Eric, who had been the one to help launch Julia's career by getting her one of her first roles in the film. Blood red, this was the ultimate treachery. He felt discarded by the sister he had mentored, watching as she ascended to the stratosphere of fame while he became a tabloid punchline for his legal troubles. For over 10 years, a thick, suffocating silence fell between them. Eric would later joke with a hint of pain that Julia simply got tired of being called Eric Roberts' little sister and decided to erase his name from her life. It wasn't until the birth of Julia's twins in 2004 that the frost began to melt, but the scars of that decade-long war remain etched in the Roberts family history, a reminder that in Julia's world, loyalty is conditional on conduct, even for family. But Eric wasn't the only one to feel the sting of a young Julia's ego. Years before Juliana Margulies became the Emmy-winning star of The Good Wife and ER. She was a struggling actress working as a waitress in an upscale New York restaurant that served the city's elite. It was there that she had a run-in with Julia Roberts that she would never forget. In a candid appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman, Margulies delivered a line that has since become legendary in the whisper network of Hollywood. "She's lovely when you're not waiting on her." Margulies painted a picture of a young Roberts fresh off the rare, a defining success of Pretty Woman, who appeared to treat the service staff as invisible or worse beneath her. At 23, Julia was already the most famous woman on earth, surrounded by a fleet of 20 assistants and publicists, and for a young waitress like Margulies, the interaction was chillingly dismissive. However, this story has a rare Hollywood ending. In 2006, both women were performing on Broadway. Roberts in 3 Days of Rain and Margulies in Festin, at theaters located directly across the street from one another. One night after the curtains fell, they went out for drinks. Margulies decided to confront the superstar about that long-ago night at the restaurant. Instead of getting defensive or hiding behind her publicist, Julia reportedly looked her in the eye and asked, "Was I really that bad?" When Margulies told her she was, Julia offered a sincere, unprompted apology and insisted on paying for dinner. It was a moment of closure that suggested a woman finally grounding herself after years of being untethered by fame. The fact that the original encounter was so negative remains a testament to how America's sweetheart could sometimes be anything but sweet. If you want to find the true epicenter of the Julia is difficult narrative, you have to look no further than the set of the 1991 fantasy adventure, Hook. Director Steven Spielberg, the most powerful man in Hollywood, was attempting to create a magical reimagining of Peter Pan, but his Tinkerbell was going through a personal hell that would nearly sink the production. Julia had just suffered the collapse of her engagement to Kiefer Sutherland in a storm of scandalous headlines, and she reportedly brought that emotional chaos to the set. The crew, frustrated by her constant tardiness, her long disappearances into her trailer, and her perceived aloofness, gave her a nickname that still haunts her, Tinkerhell. It was said that she would saunter onto the set hours late and simply announce, "I'm ready now," as if the hundreds of crew members and million-dollar lighting rigs were merely props for her convenience. Spielberg, is usually the paragon of patience, eventually snapped. During a scene where Julia was supposed to be performing, he famously replied, "We're ready when I say we're ready, Julia." The tension was so thick it could be felt through the dailies. The fallout became public during a 60 Minutes interview in 1992. When asked if he would ever work with Julia Roberts again, Spielberg didn't offer the usual PR-approved, "she's great" response. Instead, he paused, gave a knowing, weary smile, and said, "It was not a great time for Julia and I to be working together." When the interviewer pushed for a yes or no, Spielberg delivered the ultimate masterclass in shade. "This is a 60 Minutes question, isn't it?" He never said yes. Julia was devastated by the betrayal, telling Vanity Fair that her eyes popped out of her head when she saw the interview. She felt that the man she trusted had joined the turncoats, failing to realize that her own behavior had pushed one of history's greatest directors to his breaking point. The wound from Hook never truly healed, and to this day, they have never collaborated again, a rare black mark on the resume of a woman who is supposed to be the industry's darling. The drama continued when two of the most celebrated actresses in history, Julia Roberts and Meryl Streep, joined forces for the 2013 film August Osage County. On paper, it was a dream pairing, but as award season approached, the industry was buzzing with reports that the two icons could barely stand to be in the same room. The conflict reportedly centered on the film's ending. In the original cut, based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning play, the story ended with a focus on Streep's character, Violet, highlighting her tragic isolation. But sources claimed that Julia wasn't having it. She reportedly felt the ending was too much of a downer and pushed for a version that shifted the emotional weight toward her own character, Barbara. When the ending was indeed changed to a more hopeful shot of Julia driving away, rumors swirled that Meryl was livid. The gossip reached a fever pitch when Streep was notably absent from the film's premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival. While her team cited other commitments, insiders whispered it was a deliberate snub of Julia. While both actresses maintained a professional front during the press tour, calling each other extraordinary, the industry knew better. In a world where Meryl Streep is the gold standard of professionalism, the suggestion that Julia Roberts had ruffled her feathers was enough to cement her reputation as a star who values her own screen time over the integrity of the script. Even when the feud isn't real, Julia seems to be a magnet for the narrative. In 1998, during the filming of Stepmom, the press was obsessed with the idea that Julia and her co-star Susan Sarandon were at each other's throats. It fit the classic Hollywood trope, two powerful women, one role, inevitable conflict. However, this is one instance where Julia may have been the victim of the machine. Susan Sarandon revealed years later that the entire feud was actually manufactured by her own publicist at the time, who believed that a catfight narrative would generate more magazine covers and ticket sales than a story about two women working in harmony. Julia and Susan actually got along quite well, but the fact that the public and the industry were so willing to believe Julia was feuding with a legend like Sarandon speaks to the underlying perception of her character. She had become the usual suspect for on-set drama, a label that is almost impossible to shake once it takes root in the collective consciousness of the paparazzi. But if the Sarandon feud was fiction, the war with Nick Nolte was very, very real. In 1994, the two starred in the romantic comedy I Love Trouble, a film that should have been a charming romp, but instead became a cautionary tale of professional loathing. From the first week of shooting, the chemistry was non-existent, not because they weren't good actors, but because they genuinely despised each other. Julia reportedly found Nolte's brash, unpredictable, macho energy repulsive, while Nolte took a perverse delight in pushing Julia's buttons until she retreated into what were described as diva temper tantrums. The animosity reached such a level that they refused to film their romantic scenes together. Think about that in a movie about two people falling in love. The leads were so disgusted by one another that they had to use stand-ins and camera tricks to create the illusion of closeness. Julia didn't keep the hatred private. In an interview with the New York Times, she ignored all the rules of Hollywood diplomacy and called Nolte, completely disgusting. She claimed he went out of his way to repel people. Nolte never wanted to be outdone in a public spat fired back with a verbal grenade of his own. It's not nice to call someone disgusting, but she's not a nice person. Everyone knows that. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a character assassination on both sides. The film suffered immensely from their mutual contempt, and critics pointed out that you could practically feel the coldness radiating off the screen. It remains one of the most famous examples of how a personal grudge can derail a multi-million-dollar project. Decades later, Nolte has expressed mild regret over how public the fight became. But Julia has largely avoided his name treating that chapter of her life as a mistake. She'd rather the world forgot. The common thread in all these stories is a woman who, at the peak of her power, may have believed that her fame exempted her from the traditional rules of social and professional conduct. Whether it was the Tinkerhell era of the 90s or the creative clashes of the 2000s, Julia Roberts has consistently found herself at odds with people who refuse to bow to the sweetheart myth. There is a complexity to her that the media often ignores. A woman who is fiercely protective of her image, her family, and her position at the top of the food chain. To some, she is a demanding diva who uses her smile as a shield. To others, she is a survivor of the brutal Hollywood machinery who had to be tough to avoid being eaten alive. As Julia enters the later stages of her career, the feuds have largely quieted, replaced by a more grounded, family-oriented public persona. She spends more time at her ranch in New Mexico than at industry parties, and she is far more selective about the projects she takes. But in Hollywood, the past is never truly buried, it's just archived. The stories of her clashes with Spielberg, Nolte, and even her own brother continue to circulate in acting classes and production offices as warnings about the high cost of a reputation. For Julia, the sweetheart label has always been a double-edged sword. It gave her the world, but it also made her failures in manners and temperament seem all the more shocking to a public that expected her to be Vivian Ward in real life. The reality of Julia Roberts is likely somewhere in the middle of the two extremes. She is a woman who can be incredibly gracious, as she was when she apologized to Juliana Margulies, but who can also be a formidable adversary when her ego or her creative vision is challenged. She is a product of an era of stardom that no longer exists, a time when stars were treated like deities and their whims were law. When you spend 30 years being told your smile is worth millions, it's inevitable that some of that will go to your head. The hatred directed toward her by certain peers is often a reaction to that perceived entitlement, a refusal to accept the pretty woman act when the Tinkerhell reality is what they experienced on set. What do you think about the hidden side of Julia Roberts? Is she truly the victim of a sexist industry that labels strong women as difficult? Or is the trail of burnt bridges with legends like Spielberg and Nolte proof that there's fire behind the smoke? The debate over her character is as enduring as her filmography. One thing is certain. Whether you love her or hate her, you cannot ignore her. She has survived scandals, divorces, and the inevitable aging process of a woman in the spotlight. And she has done it all with that same million-dollar smile. But as the stories of these rivalries show, even the most beautiful smiles can hide a history of war. The Roberts family may have mended their rift, and Spielberg may have moved on to new muses, but the legend of Tinkerhell will forever be a part of the secret history of Hollywood. In the final analysis, Julia Roberts is a lesson in the power of branding. She has managed to maintain her status as an icon despite a resume of on-set conflicts that would have ended the career of a lesser actress. It is a testament to her talent and her sheer force of personality. She understood early on that the public didn't want the truth. They wanted the fantasy. And she gave it to them performance after performance until the line between the woman and the brand became so blurred that not even she could tell them apart. But for those who stood in the path of the Tinkerhell storm, the fantasy was never enough. They saw the human being behind the movie star, a woman who could be brilliant, sharp, and occasionally completely disgusting. This is the real Julia Roberts, the woman who fought her way to the top and didn't care who she had to step on to stay there. As we look back at these rivalries, we're reminded that Hollywood is not a place of fairy tales. It is a place of business. And in business, there are no sweethearts, only winners and losers. Julia Roberts has been winning for a long time, but the cost of her victory is written in the silence of those who no longer speak her name. From Eric Roberts to Nick Nolte, the list of the disenchanted is long and storied. It serves as a reminder that fame is a temporary mask, but character is a permanent legacy. Julia may have the Oscars and the box office records, but she also has the Tinkerhell nickname and the "not a nice person" quotes to carry with her into history. Whether she cares is another question entirely. At the end of the day, she is still Julia Roberts. The rest of the world is still just waiting on her. So next time you see that famous laugh on your television screen, remember the 60 Minutes question and the completely disgusting quote. Remember that even the most perfect woman in the world has a shadow. And in Hollywood, that shadow is often where the most interesting stories are found. Thank you for joining us as we uncovered the stars who can't stand Julia Roberts. The glamour of the red carpet is often just a thin layer of glitter over a bed of thorns, and we're here to help you see the reality beneath the shine. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we continue to peel back the layers of the industry's most famous secrets. The truth is always out there, hiding behind $1 million smile. We'll see you in the next deep dive into the hearts and the horrors of Hollywood. Goodbye, and keep your eyes open. The next scandal is always just one smile away.